go.
Hello, it's me again. I'm gonna get out 2 blogs tonight. I'm very excited. Productive. Very productive. I've had a number of questions on the concept of breath, or the topic of breath. They've been asked in various ways, and I think most of you are probably asking the same thing. Sandra, I don't know how to pronounce your last name, Hamaoui, Sandra. You say, do you have any breathing exercises that you would recommend for building up breath control and support? I feel like a lot of teachers today don't talk about breath nearly enough. So I'm happy to talk about it, but I want you all to take this with a big grain of salt, because I am not a voice teacher. I say that all the time, and it's really true. I am not a pedagogue. I have never given an actual voice lesson. I don't feel confident at all in my ability to impart wisdom in a certain way that can actually be applied to a vocal technique. That's a very different talent and a different skill set. So I appreciate your questions about technique. I hesitate to do it because I do believe so much that it's a very personal thing, and oftentimes a little bit of advice can be taken in the wrong way, and you can end up doing damage very quickly before you even know it. Especially to dole out advice and then not have the chance to follow it through in person is, I think, a very tricky thing with voice teaching. So I hope you all understand if I don't give out specific things, but I can talk a bit about the breath. And I'm answering this now because I did a masterclass earlier today with the Adler Fellows here in San Francisco, and somebody asked about breath. And I had to sort of articulate it in a way that sounded intelligent in front of the group of donors. And the more I do think about breath control, I'm not going to talk about, do you push out or do you pull in? And where's the onset of breath? And, what's the speed of release and all that stuff? I'm not going to talk about anything technical that way. What I do want to talk about is freedom. What I'm quite sure of is that your body is an absolutely perfect instrument. I talked about your instrument being a Stradivarius. If you take good care of it, it can be a Stradivarius. I like that image. Maybe there's a different kind of violin you prefer, but a really valuable instrument. It's actually perfect as it is, unless you have some kind of congenital deformity. The actual body itself is a perfect instrument, and that is easily demonstrable by a 3-month-old infant who's sitting there and wailing away. You don't see a baby kind of go, I'm really upset, hold on, and then start to wail away. There's no placement, there is no concern about, is it diaphragmatic breathing? Am I releasing? Am I pushing in? Am I pulling in? They open up their mouth, there's a big intake of breath, their belly pops way out, totally free, totally open, and they onset their sound, phonating through the vocal cord, and they can go for hours and hours and hours. I'm so sorry for the parents out there that have to deal with that. We are built to do that. There's a couple things I want to point out about it. For me, the biggest issue with breath support is not what we're doing with our breath, but it's everything that we're doing to interfere with the breath. We can interfere with it on the way in. We can overbreathe. If you overbreathe, in order to stop all that breath, you have to cut everything off to sort of contain it, okay? If you take in a nice little breath that is going to be circular and just sort of keep going, that doesn't cause you to block anything off, when you are ready to phonate, you don't have to push through any blockage, okay? You think about the breath, it intakes, it drops totally freely, it goes right down, bonk, and then you're ready to go. Just as when you're speaking. You're not thinking about breathing when you're speaking, and you can go on and on. Listen to some teenage girl, they can go on and on forever, and they're not thinking about breath. So make sure that when you're taking in your air, you're not over breathing, and you're not forcing the air in, and you're not forcing it to go anywhere. Allow it to go all the way in. If you can allow it to go 360 degrees, all the way to your back ribs, the low ribs, sort of your back tailbone, and your side ribs, and all your side, and if it sort of becomes like an inner tube around you, that's brilliant. Don't force that, but if you can really let it drop, it becomes like a tire around you. Again, I don't think about forcing that, but I just make sure the conditions are right, that when I open up and the air comes in, it's going all the way down completely free. If it enters freely and without force, the odds are much stronger that it's going to come out freely. Okay? Now, this idea of breath support to the sound. I don't really use that word. I understand why it's used. Support to me infers this kind of thing, but support can also be, and if you think about it in a different way, something that allows a foundation underneath you, something that allows you to move forward with what you need to do. So I'm much more about the breath being free and aiding the phonation that's going to happen in the chords. If you're too aggressive with it, you're going to have to contain it at some point, which will be jaw tension, base of the tongue tension in here. That's been a real nemesis for me. I use my tongue sometimes for support. Not ideally, it's accidental, but it's what happens because something is blocking the free release of my breath. For me, the biggest job of a singer is getting out of the way of the breath doing its job. It's amazing. When we're talking, we're not thinking about breath, but the breath is there constantly for us. It's just doing its job, and we're not hindering it, we're not forcing it, we're not making it. I hope I'm explaining this. This is why I don't talk about breath, because it can get a little misconstrued and a little convoluted. If I'm feeling pressure or tight, or the sound is tightening up on me, it's not a matter of me needing to support the breath more. It's a matter of me needing to release somewhere so that the breath can move more freely. That's how I think of it. And there are definitely different schools of thought that also work, but this is simply what works for me. If I'm feeling tension in the tongue, it tells me my breath is not free. So on the next, as I finish that phrase, I'm going to make sure that I'm stopping the air on a nice flow of breath, and I'm not cutting it off. And then when I come in, I'm going to try not to gasp. I'm going to try not to force the air in. I'm going to let it drop. Just drop right down like a water balloon and go in the bottom. And then make sure that I'm not constricting, I'm not adding pressure, I'm not manufacturing anything. All those things make it impossible for the breath to move freely. All those things. I'm somebody, I'll arch the back of my neck and even the back of my small back, the lower back, when I'm sort of going up for a high note. Now you're all going to look for it on YouTube, but we all have our things. And I'll sort of do that. Well, that's constricting the windpipe. So it's not a matter of, and then the breath isn't moving freely. And so it's not a matter of like, I need to support the breath more. It's like, no, I need to release that, open up, create more space in my body so that the breath, it's right there. So for me, all this idea of breath support is about release and making the conditions right so that the breath can move freely. That means not a huge gasp of intake on the breath. Sometimes you can breathe through your nose because you can't go, you can't over breathe with your nose. So sometimes it's a nasal breath. Sometimes it's easy, but it should be pretty silent, ideally. The breath drops, and then as I'm phonating, I'm just making sure that the tongue isn't getting involved. I'm making sure that the throat isn't getting involved. I'm making sure I'm not putting my body in a weird position. And the more open it can take, and the more I just keep that phonation happening, the breath is responding. It's interesting because one thing I like to talk about is there really shouldn't be so much difference between speaking and singing. So ideally, if I'm speaking along here and I'm really moving the breath, you can't actually really tell when I start singing or when I go back to speaking. See, I was singing in the middle of that, but you couldn't tell. That's a really good baseline for me about what my breath should be doing. I don't know if this is helpful or not. There are a couple exercises that I do that tell me if my breath is connected and if it's moving freely, and that usually involves chromatics. A full-on scale of chromatics, up and down, up and down, up and down. Because when you're doing a chromatic, which is also sort of like a sigh or a siren, only just a little bit more specific, the breath doesn't have a chance to stop, or we don't have a chance to hold it or to grasp it. So there's a lot of chromatics in my warm-up, in my exercise. The other little thing I might add in there is if you're pretty specific, I'm being nice, if you're very specific on the vowel that you're singing, if you're singing a pure vowel, and you're really clear here in your brain about what that vowel is, the breath has a much clearer track on where to go. If you're nebulous in your vowel and you get that American the breath doesn't quite know where to go. The last thing I'll say, and I actually think this is really important, but it's sort of advanced, meaning you've got to do some of the basic work before you can necessarily get here, but just put it in the back of your mind or add it into your thought process. It's an energetic thing, which is maybe a little bit hard to define, but the clearer the emotional content of what you're singing, I think the freer your breath will be. Now that can be a little bit nebulous, but it's the same thing as the vowel for me. It's if my brain knows exactly what the expressive quality is, the breath can move more freely. Somehow, that way, everything is unified and married. If I'm just thinking vocally, I start to concentrate a little bit on the breath, and then I'm thinking, oh God, is it moving? Is it even? Is my vibrato even? Is it? And I start to get a little bit like this, and there's no way the breath is going to move freely. Once I've done a lot of the vocal preparation, I'm warmed up, and I've done my breathing exercises, and I've worked on the aria, and I'm starting to get close to polishing the aria, the clearer I am on the emotional content, the freer the breath will be. I was working with a mezzo-soprano today on the Cendrillon's aria, and she ends this one long phrase, and it's really long, and it gets really piano, and it's very hard to sustain, but she's pleading to the godmother. It's the aria from Cendrillon. Marraine, Marraine, voudrez-vous me pardonner jamais? And if I'm only thinking about the breath, I get scared that the breath is going to run out, and I start trying to hold on to it and conserve it, which of course blocks off the breath, and the freedom isn't there. If I'm sitting here I'm thinking as the character now to the marraine, the godmother. Please, please, can you ever forgive me? Would you ever, ever please forgive me? Are you listening? Are you listening? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? It's endless. If that intention is here, it's really amazing. If you get out of the way and have a really clear intention on a clear vowel, the breath will be there for you. It just will be. I mean, it's a weird thing, and it involves a lot of trust, and it involves sort of stepping off the cliff and being prepared to fall, that the breath may also give out. But the freer I am in my mind, in my body, the freer the breath is. So, oh gosh, this is taking so long to explain. I'm so sorry. You guys are probably fast forwarding at this point. But what I will say is, for me, the idea of breath support is much more about release and freedom than it is about what mechanism am I using to support the sound. I'm not talking about connecting to the breath. It's vital. It's important. We need that. Legato singing will bring you more and more connection to your breath. But I really do put my focus on release and freedom. And sometimes, make no mistake about it, I'm more successful than others. Sometimes I fail miserably. But it's always a work in progress. And every phrase that we sing is a new creation and a new complete entity, because every day our body is different. Every day our emotional state is different. So you have to be about the business of releasing and creating on that breath. It's a little long-winded, but I hope that makes some sense. And, be your own guide so that the easier it gets, you're on the right track. When it starts feeling stuck and hard, it means you're resisting somewhere. And you have to become your own teacher to understand where you're resisting and what you're blocking. And you have to monitor that as best you can. So stay really positive and make that breath be the conduit for your emotion. That's a big key. Good luck. Happy breathing. I did 2 vlogs tonight. Woohoo! Bye, you guys. Take care. Bye-bye.
Oh, please release me. Let me go.